Okay, so our topic, swimming for triathlon. And this little video that I've got playing here is actually a really neat free video that you can download as an app if you have a Mac. It's called Mr. Smooth Freestyle Visualization. And I use it all the time for visualizations for swimming. It's really handy and kind of neat because you get these different perspectives and you can kind of play around with and do some rotations and get to see what it looks like for different aspects of the stroke. You can speed it up, you can slow it down, and you can get different viewpoints in the water. So I really like doing this to show, kind of slow motion, some best form, and that way I can kind of even pause it and call out different things. So it's a free thing, but it's just a little visualization. There's these little tips and tricks you use as coaches to, help your athletes visualize better swimming. And it is just that, a major visualization that you have to transfer that visualization into actuality, into physicality in the pool. And what we think we're doing in the pool is rarely what's actually happening. And that's where, the challenge comes in trying to help your athletes bridge that gap. And so drills obviously create the muscle memory, and water is 80 times more dense than air. So we really have to cheat the water and get really slick and slippery through the water. And I think that by the end of this call, you guys will have a better appreciation for kind of the different limitations. And I'd say my goal for you guys is to understand the limitations that your athletes face. What are the key common errors that we see in swimming, and then what are their corrections in some of their drills that are associated with them. So getting started right into it, I'm going to lead out with, we're talking about swimming for triathlon. So, swimming in open water versus, in a pool, two very different things. Pool swims are controlled, they are safe. Open water is an unnerving, kind of environment. A lot of people really struggle, especially early on, in getting comfortable in the water. One of the reasons why there aren't a lot more triathletes than there are runners is because of the swim alone. So, your hurdle is to keep your athletes safe, happy, engaged, and relaxed in the water. Actually doing a workout, save the harder efforts, and at least for your beginner athletes, when we're talking about, putting their workouts best forward on harder sessions in the bike and the run, and then the water, it's really more about making sure that they can control their effort. Pool swimming, obviously temperature, it's a non-issue when we're talking about pool swimming in open water, right? It can be very cold. I dropped in a link here about an article I wrote about kind of coping with cold water. There's a lot of tricks to staying warm before a race, and it's getting that core temperature in the right spot. Sometimes you want the core temperature to be warm before you go to cold water. On a hot race day, you definitely want to keep your core temperature low, and so the temperature of the water that you're going into also can be really important. So temperature can be an issue for your very lean athletes. They can be an issue even for your not so lean athletes. So core temperature going in is actually the most important thing. How long somebody can stay in cold water is really dependent upon their body fat. So beginner to intermediates, as I mentioned, will have this open fear of water, fear of open water, that is. And granted, it doesn't stop there. I mean, it really is, even the pro level will have some fear of water. And so, you have to consider that this is a thing. So I'll tell you the story, and I'm going to stop my screen share here for just 1 second so you guys can get a chance to see me again. I used to do a lot of open water coaching in New York City, and I would take some folks out to Brighton Beach and to Coney Island. And I had this one athlete I was working with in particular, and I said to her, okay, great, we're going to do a nice easy warm-up, go out into the water, and then, I'll meet you there, and we'll start our session together from out there. Well, she swam great, straight out, 50 yards right off the beach, and I chased after her, and she was going pretty fast, and my first tip was going to be, hey, you should probably slow down. And I get out to where she was, and immediately when I got there, she hit a 180 and hightailed it right back to shore. And so I turned around and, started chasing after her. And I get back on shore, and she's standing on shore, hands on her hips, kind of proud and just smiling at me. And I said, I thought we were going to meet out in the water. And she said, oh, I can't stop once I get going. I can't stop. And I said, wait a minute, you can't tread water? And, light bulbs are going off in my head, and to her it's like no big deal. But, there are some basics that you have to kind of assume and not assume in swimming. Treading water is the most basic of all properties, and there's a lot of people who can learn how to swim or are self-taught, and they may learn things out of order, or they may have been self-taught from the web. So it's really important to kind of know who they are, what their background is, and obviously along the way in your coaching experience, you want to try to not have these types of things happen, but that was a learning experience for me early on in coaching to make sure that every person I ever take into open water, I give them a little more of a quiz as to what they're capable of and their experience level. So that's just my story. I always like to give you guys some kind of anecdotal stuff besides just the theory that's out there. All right, so back into swimming. Now, some of these numbers that I'm pulling up here, these are what I see. These are not like I pulled these off the web. This is just what I see in coaching in general. 90% of triathlon swimmers are limited by form. That's true and true. I think that 90% are really have some level of form limiter that is preventing them from swimming faster, and that they're either suffocating in the water or they're kind of punching the water in that regard. 90% of triathletes train only 10% or less of the time in open water. So even fewer athletes are getting out there and experiencing what it's going to be like on race day. And unfortunately, unless they're racing a lot, it's not usually until the second or third race of the season that a lot of triathletes will start to feel more confident, more comfortable in open water, and not get such a parasympathetic response when they're standing on the water, out on the shore, exploding with energy to go out into the water. And in reality, we want to keep them super calm and relaxed. It's you guys have both heard me say it, but it's a lot more Enya and less Guns N' Roses. So it's really calm. Pool lengths, 25 yard versus 25 meter. Which one should I use? It's potato. So if your workouts are in meters or yards, just convert the two. You can convert them in training peaks, or you can just tell your athlete, hey, if you're in a meter pool, just use meters. If you're in a yard pool, use yards, and it'll be just fine. Pool splits versus open water splits. In general, in calm bodies of water, you will see athletes do better who have wetsuits. So open water splits tend to be a little better. Now, pool splits tend to be a little better versus open water if there's not crazy waves or fear factor. So fear factor could be a race scenario. So sometimes racing, you're actually slower because some athletes can't hold that form because they get so animated and so excited before they go into the water. Pool splits, it's nice because it's a very measurable, predictable thing. Again, if the race that we're doing is in open water, there should be some types of sets that prepare for that race intensity. If you're going to go into the water hard, then we need to have some sort of race intensity where you start hard and you settle into a certain pace. That's something that not all athletes get acquainted with readily enough. And, some athletes have more experience than not. Like your B intermediate athletes aren't going to need quite so much as that. Your A-level athletes shouldn't be starting into, races that hard. And your experienced athletes, your C-level athletes, they're going to be, certainly looking to practice some hard starts and, settling into race pace. Continuing on with pool swimming versus open water swimming. Swimming in groups is great, especially to get race specific and get that practice. I love it anytime an athlete asks to either swim more or they ask to swim in a group. Those are huge. Yes, you can practice your wetsuit in the pool. The chlorine will break it down if you don't clean it up, and it certainly can shorten the lifespan of the suit if you do it a lot. but it can be done, and it really should be done before some of your major races. Even 2 and 3 times is enough to get what you need from a practice perspective. Sighting practice in the pool and how to. I'm going to see if I can do this here from an office chair, which is always exciting, and show you guys. You guys see me okay now?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right, so one of the ways that you can think about sighting is as the trailing arm is pushing back on the water, you're going to want to lift your head, and then all in one motion as the arm is recovering, you look off to the side and put your head back down. So the goal is to kind of put some downward pressure. This would be back completely, and this would be down and back. And down and back is actually pushing down so that my head can pop up and I can look forward, get a quick view, 1 to 2 seconds, and then all in one motion, I'm rolling onto my side before taking the next stroke and putting my head back down. So you're really just doing it within the breath. Now, you'll see a lot of different things. You'll see stop, take a look around, doggy paddle, backstroke, all sorts of stuff. But think about it like this. If you stop in the water, you are literally, it'd be like in a running race, planting both feet and going, where do I go next? Where do I go next? Right? I mean, visually, you get it. You're going to slow down a heck of a lot doing that kind of stuff. So it is really key to teach your athletes how to sight, how to practice that, and it is an addressable limiter when you have experience and you can, tell them, hey, go practice it with the group and get that experience. If they're, not able to get to a open body of water, which is extremely common, I find a lot of the athletes that we work with in Canada, for instance, it's like practically end of June, that they even get into their first open water sessions. And so, it is a challenge to get that experience. And so I try to get them right out of the gate to get into the open water experience. Okay, master swim programs. These are great because they do have this what I call group swim think, whereas you're doing monkey see, monkey do. You see the athlete in front of you, you see what they're doing, you try to chase them, you're mimicking their stroke, their movements. If they're flip turning or they're pushing off the wall, if they're pushing hard or not, you have to learn how to literally swim on command when the practice is going. So master swim programs are good for athletes certainly that are not beginner, but have at least a year under their belt. So I'd say your B-level athletes are greater for the most part. Masters programs tend to be very good on workout instruction. They tend to be a little bit limited on swim drills instruction. I always find I'm surprised that they don't work enough drills into their main sets. I think it's because people really just want workouts, and they're not really designed for the coaches to be giving that type of instruction, and usually it's like an offline one-to-one type of a thing. You definitely want to have your athletes video themselves for corrections in the pool and when possible open water. And you want to encourage your athletes to just text you these videos. It takes very minimal time for the athlete to just text that to you, and in an instant they can get your feedback on their stroke. And with the iPhone or any other audio device, you can record yourself talking back to them and just give a quick correction. You guys have all of the quick shorthands to the videos. So for instance, if you say, I want to work on the catch, and I type into Attila catch, all the drills that are associated with the catch phase of the swim stroke are right there. So you got a shorthand for everything. You've seen probably a lot of these shorthands, both of you guys, but just so you know, even if you wanted all the swim drills, for instance, you could say .swim drills, and all of them come up. So that's really, really handy to have. It takes no time at all to be able to give somebody that type of provided feedback, and they'll make a lot more gains if they don't have to wait around, for help. Okay, so moving on, primary stroke errors. Any questions on that so far, Attila? Any questions? Suzanne? Yeah, pretty straightforward stuff so far. All right, so primary swim stroke errors. Flat hips and not rotating enough to breathe. So our Mr. Swim Stroke guy here, he's doing a pretty decent job here. You can see that this hip is going right up to the surface of the water. And what you also note is that he rotates from his ankle, then to his hip, and then the very last piece that comes around his shoulder, and finally his head when he takes a breath underneath his arm right here. So nice sequence there. Let's see, go back. All right, next one, low elbows on the recovery. A lot of times you'll see athletes just not lifting the elbow high up enough on the recovery, and what that in effect does is it sets you up for a poor entry. And when the entry is poor, what that means is your athlete is going to now no longer be able to get his arm at this nice long angle that goes into the water. So notice this guy, his arm is a little bit at an angle down towards the bottom of the pool. Well, if his elbow doesn't get high up enough here, what will happen is he can only launch the arm straight flat onto the water. And when he launches it flat straight on top of the water here, he's pressing on top of the water. And that positive pressure there is only going to put pressure on his hips, and he's going to sink his legs down to the bottom. So it's a mechanical flaw, and when you want to get your athletes to get better, you need them to get more propulsion, and this is actually one real easy way to do it. Is just set up the mechanics of the arm stroke. So get those elbows up nice and high. I want him to hit right in that circle that I'm holding right here. And so he's doing a nice job. Sometimes a lot of athletes will have their elbows down here, way low. All right, next one up is hip sinking. To stay afloat.
Can I tell you a funny situation I had with the high elbow?
Yes, absolutely.
So Attila, do you know Kaylee at Chelsea Piers? So I've done lessons with her, and she would have me get out of the water, stand on the side of the deck, on the side of the pool, and I have done everything everything I've ever done in my life has been a field sport. But she would have me on the side of the pool and tell me, you need high elbows. And I'd be like, high elbows? Everything I've done is vertical. High elbows to me meant high elbows. I could not comprehend what she was talking about because swimming is horizontal. So high elbows, I just couldn't get, like my brain couldn't process. Every other thing I'd ever done was this way. I was doing the high elbows totally. One day I was just like, oh my God, I'm so stupid, I get it.
At some point, some of this stuff, you actually have to have, you have to kind of physically grab somebody's arm and show them where that is, Suzanne. If they don't get it, I can tell you a lot of times when, I was working in the endless pool, I just have to get into the water and just, take that elbow and guide it so you could feel that forearm moving and recovering like this. Like, you just literally put your hand on it so it's like, oh, right, up, get the elbow up.
Right. It was simply because I'd never done anything vertical. I mean, horizontal. Every other activity I've ever done in my life, so athletically wise, is this way.
Yeah.
Their body was this way, not this way. So, anyway, that was just my little,
No, it's
okay,
good.
being like, duh, light bulb, got it.
It's also kind of neat in swimming how that does happen. You have these moments of clarity in the water, and also moments of what the heck is happening here? How do I get past this hurdle? So it's nice. It happens in fits and spurts, is like I like to say it. All right, so pull up the Mr. Swim. All right, so hip sinking in the water. A quality kick helps raise the back end in the swim. It really is not about the propulsion for most of your athletes. It's about the balance position in the water. And the feet and the top and the bottom surface area of those feet are going to actually lift and generate lift to the back of the athlete. And that's just so that they stay horizontal in the water and so that they can continue to rotate about a center axis to breathe. So if somebody has a poor kick or an improper kick, or they're not kicking from their hip, what'll happen is they'll really slow in the water, and they may even kick so hard that, especially beginners, these muscles, their quads and their hamstrings, begin to activate, their lungs start to run out of oxygen, and they're going to swim for 25 to 50 yards before needing a break. So the best swim kickers in the business, Michael Phelps included, they're lucky if they get 30% of their power coming from their kick, 30, 40%. A lot of people have zero or negative in terms of when they kick, their ankle flexibility is poor enough that they actually will slow themselves down. The more that you can restrict the kick back here and make it just put a slight amount of positive pressure, the better. So we talked a little bit about this one, pressing on the catch. So that means when the elbow's low coming across the top of the water on recovery, then the hand is going in and pushing on top of the water right here, which pushes the head upwards, and creates a heck of a lot of problems in swimming. Next up is poor extension of the arms in the front and the back of the stroke. This guy's got really nice long extension. You can see he reaches all the way forward. He almost just about completely locks out the arm. And in the back, his legs are nice and long and straight. When he rolls onto his side, notice that he's got a small amount of flex in the knee, but really it's pretty darn straight. All right, so too large of a kick in the back, and rather than extension and kicking from the hip, like I just kind of touched on that a little bit, but notice that it's kind of like a straight leg kick, more like a flipper. Like if you were to watch a dolphin, they would have a small amount of flex probably right here too, and then if this was their fin, rather than having two, it would just be one solid motion, but it's just a short noodly-like whip that happens through the body, and it starts from the hip. But that motion, if you tell somebody to kick in a 6-inch box, they're already going to kick in a foot box square. So you have to tell them kick in a 6-inch box, and then usually it'll be about right.
The other issue I had coming from field sports, swimming, ankle flexibility, which is where I think your Agascu has really helped me.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I tended to swim with my foot, not realizing it, but my foot was like this. It's not like I would think it was like this, or more so like your little swimmer guy who has very flexed ankles.
Yeah.
It's a hard concept. If you've never done that, that's not, if you've only done field sports, which was my background, you don't do that.
A lot of collegiate swim programs won't take athletes if they don't have a certain range of flexibility in that foot, in the ankle. And when you put the ankle up like this, it's a break. It's basically a break in the water. And so, I've seen some athletes try to stretch their feet out, like sitting on a tennis ball and things like that. You gotta be careful with that because you can really injure yourself, especially if you've got running and biking involved. If you're a full-time dedicated swimmer, then maybe you decide to do something like that. But I think for the most part, just restricting the kick is not a bad idea. Conversely to what swimmers will do, swimmers don't have to worry about saving their legs, right, for the rest of the day. So a swimmer can kick pretty darn hard, and if it's a proficient kick, and if they activate their quads and their hamstrings, do they really care if they're a little bit gassed? No, they're totally fine. So I think it is a little bit different, and that's why I'm starting off telling you guys a little bit more about what swimming for triathletes is all about, as it is a little bit different. If we were talking more about, hey, you're going to go and swim the 400 IM or something like that, competitively, it'd be much different. Okay. But those field sports did lend themselves in a lot of other ways. You got your benefit from it. Don't worry, Suzanne. Maybe not in the water directly, but you got benefit.
I am working on it. I told you I have a whole new perspective for the swimming thing.
Yep.
Attitude and effort. I'm trying.
Yep. No, that's true. Okay. Back at it, crossing over beneath the body. You'll see that this is this guy's center body line right here. And underneath the water, what he's doing a really nice job of is his hands never cross the center body line. And some of your athletes will bring that arm really close underneath their chest. And unfortunately, that is not a very powerful position. Because when you cross over underneath the water, that means you're actually using a lot of your shoulders. So if your athletes start complaining of shoulders problems, that generally means that they may be pulling underneath the water too close beneath them. It's not a very powerful position when you try to pull from your shoulder in the water, but rather what we want to do is pull from the lats. And so if we look down from the top view here, if he has that arm a little bit wider out on the pull phase, then he's engaging these huge muscles, his lats, and that's really where it's at. You really want these muscles to be engaged. Most swimmers that are really great swimmers have this V shape, this incredible V shape, and that's because they're developing their back muscles. So that's something you need to be mindful is when your athletes have shoulder problems. Crossing over also in front of the water is important too. If your athletes, this is the center, right? You can use the line underneath the water in a lane line to make sure that you're keeping nice and straight, so that if his hand is going across his head and his face, which is extremely common for most beginner swimmers, then that crossing over is going to take a lot of power out of his stroke, and it's going to put a lot of pressure on these shoulders, and we don't want that to happen. So arm position, if you were to type in .arm position, then you would get all the different drills that would go along with that. So if you reach a little too far into the water, you also can land kind of flat on the water, and this kind of goes back to pressing on the catch a little bit. So we also don't want to go too far with our hand entry into the water. And I'm going to go to the side view here because I think it's just a little bit better of a view. So notice that he doesn't completely max out his hand. He could go this far with his hand, but instead he slips his hand just a little bit in front of his face, about 7-8 inches off the front of his head, and he enters it in, and then he extends beneath the water just a little bit as he takes a stroke. Okay, this is a common problem as well for a lot of triathletes, is not being able to have one arm power the stroke at all times. So what you'll notice is, even though one arm is there, it looks like there's constantly two arms in motion, really just one is in motion, and the other one is doing a little bit of recovery at top of the water, but the other, only one arm is controlling, I should say, the water at a time. So that's a key distinction, because if you're trying to get the sequencing down and the power right in your stroke, you want to be very powerful underneath the water. And so one problem I do have a little bit with this animation is it doesn't show that the arm underneath the water should be moving more rapidly, and that the arm above the water actually should be moving a bit more slowly. So physically speaking, much faster with the pull underneath the water, slow motion on top of the recovery, nearly pausing at the top of the stroke before taking another stroke. Poor head position, this is generally speaking common. You want your eyesight to be down in front of you beneath the water, and you want to have it about 30 meters in the water down in front of you, head down as if you were putting face down in a pillow. If you were to look at an athlete swimming, they would have their head down so much so that they'd actually be able to tuck a tennis ball right here, right there, and they'd actually be able to hold it when they're swimming. That is a pretty decent head position. The water is going to break right on the front of the head. All right, so that's head position. Dropping the lead arm is another real biggie. This just basically means you're rushing to take another stroke almost too quickly. And if you rush to take the stroke too quickly, you're going to have a whole lot of different sequencing and timing issues. But leaving one arm out without dropping it and taking it away shortens your vessel, you as a body in the water, and it makes it much harder to power transfer on that next stroke. So if you pull that arm away, you're not very sleek in the water at all. So we want one arm to power the stroke at all times, and we don't want you to drop that lead arm. We want you to wait until the trailing arm is about here. I would even say in this video, let's see if I can slow it down even more. You can kind of see he's actually rushing his stroke just a tiny bit. His finger should be a little further forward before he starts to take that next stroke. There you go. A little bit further forward. Any questions on that, Suzanne? Attila?
Are you familiar? There's some drill you do, which I don't know if you ever do, but where you put the the paddle on your head.
The paddle on the head.
Like you literally have the paddle like here. And try to keep it there. I think it has to do with head position, but I'm thinking it's not a big drill because you might know.
Is this the? Are you talking about the press the button drill, where you pause by pressing the front of the head before you take another stroke?
And you literally swim with your paddle, like somehow, like a book on your. You know how people are taught to walk with it. It's a very similar thing, but you put your paddle there. But it must have to do with keeping your head in the proper position.
I don't know if I've seen that one. I mean, there's so many funky drills you can do, but
I'm kind of glad that's not in your repertoire.
That one sounds a little oddly cruel, but hey, I've been known to give a few oddball workouts myself, so I don't know.
That's okay.
I guess balance and position, something to do with the head. If you can find it, send it my way. I'd love to see it, review it.
I'm not. If I find it, why would I send that to you? I have enough issues with my swimming for you to add that to me.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, one thing, Cliff, I would say is when you look at the body as an object in the water, and just observing the computer animation. One thing that I noticed as well is the glide phase of the entire motion. So and this is more a question than a statement. Should there be a little bit of a gliding phase whereby you feel that the body is gliding for a nanosecond at least before you continue with the next stroke?
Yeah, 100%. So with this animation, it's nice because you can see different angles and he's continuously swimming. In reality, right, there actually is a longer pause and a glide before he takes a stroke again. In fact, there's parts of the stroke that speed up and slow down in time that you're not seeing in his animation. So for that reason, yeah, you definitely want to be able to power the stroke so successfully underneath the water that you can carry a very long time frame of your arm up here before you have to take the next stroke. Any very capable swimmer, high-profile swimmer, is going to be able to take one powerful stroke, and it looks like they go for forever. And so this guy doesn't have that, right? He looks a little bit novice in his ability to glide, but he definitely has some good mechanics going on. Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned the drill, the kind of the tipping the head.
Yeah. Press the button drill.
I do that every single time I get in the water, even if it's just 25 yards. It just wakes up the timing kind of genes in me about the rhythm of the stroke. I do that all the time. It works for me.
Yeah, it's a great one, and I'll tell you why it's a great one versus, like, you'll see a lot of times the catch-up drill takes the place of that. And the problem with the catch-up drill is you lock out both hands up front and no arm is controlling the water. So you have this almost like seesaw where you start to fall out of the water. And the press the button drill forces you to pause where I'm asking you to, which is at the top of the stroke. We know that the elbow should slow to the top, almost pause, and then continue on. And so if you're forced to push that button right there, then the elbow pauses in the correct spot. So it's a great drill to keep in the repertoire. For a period of time, I stopped giving the catch-up drill. I just felt it was hurting people, especially in the beginning, because then you have to go and you have to teach people how not to do the catch-up drill. Sometimes another drill that might be not terribly bad to do is, if you hold like a swim bar out front and you take a stroke and then grab it, and then take a stroke and then grab it. At least that teaches you to be powerful with one arm. Rather than just glide and lock out front, which creates a lot of sag in the stroke. Yeah, good observation.
And then we move on, and Suzanne, you mentioned this. It's so interesting to see that some of these stroke errors are rooted in just plain lack of flexibility. And exhibit number one is me when I try to do the high elbow thing. And my shoulders are just not like it frustrates the hell out of me because mentally I know what I'm supposed to do, the body wants to do it. It's just, and it's probably the same with the ankles and still many other parts of the body. I actually, Suzanne, I think you're doing the same thing. The Goski's thing is a total heaven sent in that regard. Because without that, I could perhaps teach it, but I could never do it myself. So you need that flexibility in the water.
Yeah, the flexibility is helpful. One thing I would offer that you could do to overcome some of that inability to get that elbow, because a lot of people have that as an issue, is if you're pressing the chest a little bit more and you make sure you keep the chin down so that the whole body is visibly tilted downwards. They call it downhill swimming, like that visual.
Going downhill.
Yeah, that'll help at least rotate the whole arm higher up and forward. Because your goal is to try and get the elbow up, bring it across slowly, but have your forearm be perpendicular to the bottom of the pool.
Right.
If you can accomplish that, that's all you really need to do. And if you get a good push on the water and you get a good, nice, long stroke in the back, then all that should come true. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Cool. So this is a basic one, and that's just not breathing enough. It amazes me. People will swim and be so concentrated on the drill work, but they haven't even taken but 1 or 2 breaths the entire length of the pool, and they come up and they're gasped for air, and it's very hard to swim if you hold your breath. Imagine if I said, well, every couple of minutes or so you can take a breath when you're running. You'd be pretty bent out of shape at me if I give you a workout like that. So encourage your athletes to make sure they're breathing enough, and get the balance in the water so that they can do that. Moving on, swimming is a highly aerobic sport, more so than biking and running. So you're going to see that heart rate is significantly lower in the water. People will perceive it to be much higher, but it's actually quite a bit lower. Perceived effort just in general in the water is high because you're somewhat mildly suffocating. At least most beginner to intermediate athletes are, who have stroke limiters. But it is a very aerobic sport. It is low impact on the body. We can do a lot more work in the pool continuously. It may be a bit more boring for a lot of your athletes, but it's a hugely great place to invest time in your training. So I highly recommend that your athletes spend extra time in the pool if they have the time. Unfortunately, it doesn't convert, meaning the more time you spend in the pool, it is a lot of time and you don't always get as much total fitness out of it, which is a little bit frustrating. If you imagine it takes 30 to 40 minutes to get to the pool, you swim for maybe it's 30 to 45 minutes, and then it's another 30 to 45 minutes out. You've got to change and all the interactions that happen at a pool. And so door to door, it's almost 3 hours for a 45-minute workout or an hour workout. And you could easily get a lot done in a couple hours on a bike, in your trainer, in your home. So it's a careful thing. If everybody was a professional triathlete, it would be pretty easy. We would swim once a day. It'd be really easy. But everybody else has to kind of figure out how to get that swim in. Paddles are great. The size matters in paddles. So small paddles in the beginning are really great for beginners to just get a good feel and a grip for the water, to create strength in the water. Paddles and pull buoy is a nice combination occasionally to do as a recovery, nice and easy. You got to be a little careful when you get to the bigger paddles because they can put a lot of force on the shoulders, and if the mechanics aren't good and they're crossing over, they're going to really get an impinged shoulder. So you just got to be careful about that. There's the King Kong size paddles. Those are like twice the size of your hand. Unless you've got somebody who is, really, really fast and really strong, and very, very experienced, you don't want to give somebody big paddles to work with. Swimming, as you get closer to race day, you can do a lot more of it. You can do a lot more at race intensity and beyond, and not be in trouble. The final 3 to 5 weeks, you have a huge window of opportunity to pump up your swim volume. So if somebody did hardly any swimming at all, and they had a fairly experienced background in drills, they could actually get by with minimal swims each week if they just did drills alone, because they're going to have all this boomerang fitness coming from their biking and their running. That's not true for regular swimmers. This is true generally for triathletes because they are very fit. Triathletes have a lot more cardiovascular, conditioning overall. Swim volume. So beginners need a little bit less volume. They need more frequency in the water to retain and hold that good form. More experienced swimmers, if they want to really move the dial, have to do big volume. And so in the off season, and this is for more advanced athletes, I'll call them the C levels, they have to pump up their swim volume and yardage quite some. Your intermediate athletes can, toggle based on what their time constraints are and how mentally comfortable they are going to the pool that regularly. You really have to help your athletes overcome a fear of swimming. This is something that sadly happens. Everybody at some point in their swim career, usually it's when they're kids, they have some sort of bad experience that puts them into a negative space when it comes to swimming. Whether it's open water or they almost drowned or they have the thought that they might drown. And so you need to help calm them down. And the first and foremost thing is to get them relaxed in the water. It's a very different thing than biking and running. So that's why we use a lot of these Zenful terms when it comes to swimming, is because we have to be rhythmic in the breathing. We have to be dancer-like in how we move through the water. And we have to be extremely relaxed to be able to make all that happen, to cheat the water, because it's 80 times more dense than air. So, take the fear out of it. And this guy has his fearful swimmies on. Last considerations, for most triathletes, the swim will not make or break the race. It's just a fact. A lot of races will be not decided by the swim. But for the higher level folks, and every time we want to try and find more minutes to get faster each year for your athletes, that's where you're going to have to keep helping them. And it's a low-hanging fruit because it just comes down to drills. We talked about this a little bit. Crunched time-wise, athletes really should focus on drills and the gains from other sports, all the boomerang fitness. Once an athlete can swim a 30-minute or better, 70.3, or an hour Ironman, or their functional threshold pace is less than 120 per 100 yard for a 1K time trial, then their drills are not as important, and form is not a swim limiter anymore. So if you think about that, that means most triathletes have a swim limiter, most. And until you can start clocking 30 minutes or better, in a 70.3 or an hour in an Ironman or 120 per 100 FTP, you've just got to work the drills, and they're always a piece. They really should be, and they should represent in the off season a larger chunk of the swim yardage and volume. Drafting, always, it's free speed. It's just as good as it is on land with cycling, even better if you can do it successfully in open water. It is free speed. Do not swim with your head up in open water. The more times you pick up your head, the more your hips sink. That really slows down open water swim times. We have lost 0 athletes to shark attacks. The San Diego story. Okay, so anybody who ever tells you they have a shark attack fear, I'll just preface by saying shark fear is a very real fear, but we have lost 0 TriStar athletes to sharks. Fortunately, knock wood. Now, many years ago, I was coaching somebody, and they swam in San Diego, and they were doing the Cove swim, and they just couldn't get the guts up to go, so they said, I'll just watch. So they watched. Finally, the next week they were going to go. Well, turn on the news. He slept in, and sure enough, there was a shark attack in the Cove, and this guy was unfortunately killed. The guy who he was talking to said to him, and his name's Peter Narathan, the guy I used to coach, really nice guy. He said, I've been here for 30 years swimming, and I've never seen anything. And then the next day, he was fish flu. So all I will tell you is that the chances of getting struck by lightning and crashing an airplane on the same day are higher than you getting eaten by a shark. Though the fear factor, I get it. So we always want to soften the fears for our athletes. And by the way, for him, he was my one. I said, you'll never have to ever swim in open water in an ocean ever again. You don't have to. But that's my 2 cents in my story. It's pretty incredible. And the fallout after that was, unfortunately, he had done a few things that put him in a bad spot. And one of them was that he was wearing a silver wetsuit, a full head-to-toe silver wetsuit that had a lot of shimmering pieces to it. So note to self, don't make yourself a giant fish food buoy bobber.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so swimming in triathlon is the easiest part of the day. Let's just remember that it really is physiologically the easiest, and so we want to train it to be that way. So you definitely want to be fully capable, competent, and practiced before you go into any open water scenario. Most start the race too quickly. In fact, just about everybody starts the race way too quickly. And it's hard when you're fresh and you're tapered to not be too eager to jump into the water, because your perceived effort is extremely low and the water feels good, and suddenly you're well and above your threshold for the first 400 to 500 meters. Your heart rate is pinned, and the rest of the day is set to be not so great because you couldn't parcel out your effort, which we know is the way that you get the maximum out of every race that you're ever going to do. So that's the swimming for triathlon in a nutshell. There's a lot more that will go with this, but this, I want you guys to have at least the top swim limiters so that you can look at them for your athletes, address them, and be able to help them. Questions?
I'm good. I think I could have made the little video guide. The way that he swims, so like I'm very consistent, which I knew is what I have to work on. So,
yeah.
No.
Yeah. Yep.
The one question I have is, so when I talk to athletes who are perhaps brand new to swimming or to the water, one expression I started using is because they ask, so what should my time be? And I say, don't worry about time. Let's get to a level of efficiency whereby by the time you get out of the water, you won't have tired yourself out. So get to a point. So it's a qualitative target of sorts whereby your form and your body position and everything is comfortable enough that you don't tire yourself out.
Yeah. No.
Is that a silly thing to say, or?
No, it's completely and wholeheartedly accurate, because whether you're an A or a B level athlete, if you're going hard early on, or if you're going too hard, you come out of the water gassed. Number one, you're probably only saving a minute to 2 minutes on an Ironman, maybe. And in a sprint or even a shorter race where you go harder, you may actually go slower, meaning you fall apart so poorly, so bad, and you're gassed and sucking wind so bad that halfway through the swim you have to kind of doggy paddle, or you have to do some sort of awful looking stroke to get yourself somehow through the water and pull yourself up on shore. Absolutely. So it doesn't have to hurt, and it really, swimming is about how best form can you hold, how much oxygen can you take in when you roll onto your side to breathe, and then how whip-like can you pull yourself along through the water. One visual you may want to think about is, it's kind of like you and I underneath the water, we're pulling ropes. Like you go and you grab a rope and you pull it back like this, and you pull it back like this, but you're pulling it strong. And then above the water, return it very slowly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Perfect.
No, you're right. You're right. It's hard for. This is where the GPS helps us out a lot, I find, because it cue the tape. Okay, look, the first 100 was your first fastest 100 of the day. Your next 500 was your second fastest of the day, and so on and so forth. You got slower and slower and slower as you went through the whole swim. Well, that doesn't look like you parceled out your effort at all. Right. So yeah. It's clearly good to hold form and best form, or slow to a point where you can actually hold it. Not even hold for perceived effort. At that point, you're in your swims. You should learn to be holding for best form. Yeah, good observations, Attila. Any questions, Suzanne?